there's no scenario where a role somewhere is not going to be affected. I mean, if people online are looking for a sugar coated version of that, then they're
Mm,
probably in for a bit of a shock. In all honesty.
yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Career Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Kalis.
And I'm your host, Angel. This week's topic is very interesting. If you've tuned into this episode, you might be a creative who is looking to break into the tech industry or thinking about how to have a sustainable career as a creative in tech.
Yes. And the very definition of what it means to be a creative in today's world is rapidly changing. Our roles, the tools that we use is evolving. And in particular, there's a lot of debate about around creative roles in the tech industry because people are a bit uncertain about where they stand and how they can adapt to these new challenges that we see
Yeah,
today.
yeah, Kailas, I definitely felt that. And we have so many questions surrounding the future of creative work and how could this change the prospect of those looking to break into the tech industry? And how do you ensure your skills match up to what's in demand?
And here to answer these questions is Ben, head of department at Immediate Media UK. Ben, you started out as an audio engineer and you're currently head of your department and you're overseeing podcasts. So Immediate UK is actually focuses on the special interest market and y'all have over 75 million consumers. That is massive. It's super great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. It's an absolute pleasure to be on, and yeah, just really happy to get into it.
Yeah. Likewise, could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a creative and your current role at Immediate?
Yeah, definitely. Um, so KLS, you're completely right. I am currently the head of podcast for Immediate Media. And you're also completely right that Immediate Media is a UK publishing company that typically has heritage brands, things like the Radio Times, BBC History Magazine, Good Food, Gardener's World. You know, a lot of UK titles that most people in the UK would be familiar with at some level. And what my department is responsible for is helping each of those brands create podcast content, specifically podcast content to help tell the stories and envisage what the values of those brands are, but through the medium of podcasting. So, you know, we've got such brilliant staff and a lot of access to really, really great talent. And our job is really fun because we get to work with brands to reshape and reformat some of the stories we've already got, some of the values we've already got, but to make it interesting for an online audio focused audience through podcasts. So that's my current role, and that's what we currently do. But to take it way back to answer your question about my journey, I've been working in the media industry for about the last sort of 12, 13 years now, since I first finished university. And, you know, it has been an interesting journey, to say the least. I originally studied music, which I think a lot of people who become audio engineers, a lot of people who get involved with music production or radio production, audio production, I think majority of people probably come from a music background at some point. And I studied contemporary music. I finished university, and I was very, very lucky to get a junior position at a production company based in Malvern, where we specialized in creating audio content, spoken word content for heritage interpretation brands, but also we did the occasional program for Radio 3 or Radio 4. And it was a really brilliant opportunity at a junior level to learn from people who had been working with the BBC for 20, 25 plus years and really get that experience early on in my career to then give me this understanding that there is an entire industry around radio production, around podcast production, around publishers in the UK, you know, having this demand for spoken word content. And I feel like that it was that opportunity that really was a springboard that set me up for the rest of my career.
It's also a very interesting niche as well. I think that there is a lot that you could do. And I bet that the way you approached the content that you create over the years has changed as well. And part of the reason why is because of all the technological, the progress that we've made so far. But as we do adapt, we face new, unique, distinct challenges as creatives. What are some of the most persistent challenges that you've noticed, Ben?
That's a very interesting question. I think in podcasting it's a very live example. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you'd be hard pressed to find my current role, having a head of podcast position at a major UK publisher. I mean, the BBC were doing quite a lot around podcasting, various radio stations were looking at podcasting, but it certainly wasn't as mainstream as it is now. So I think the the interesting thing about our specific area is that the demand has been there for a little while, but it is becoming more and more mainstream, and audiences are continuing to grow. But it's a lot of the technology that goes around the medium that
Hmm.
hasn't really caught up with itself yet. I
Yeah.
think specifically uh, the technology around data tracking, audience tracking, understanding who users are, where they're listening, why they're listening, and alongside that, understanding the ad tech that can come in to support programs. I think compared to other forms of online media, especially websites, especially video, podcast is still a little ways behind.
Hmm.
Um, so I think as the industry continues to grow and become more lucrative and become more mainstream, we'll see more and more updates around the ad tech and around the reporting technology, which will allow us to catch up with some of our sort of cousin formats, if you will. Um, yeah, but those are the two examples that I think are the most obvious trends over sort of the last 4 or 5 years, where more and more leaps and bounds have been made, and it does give us a lot more control over how we analyze our business metrics, how we steer podcast overall. Because without visibility, you really sometimes are kind of running blind in terms of what you're actually achieving.
Absolutely.
Mm, mm,
And what impacts have you noticed kind of stemming from these challenges? Because, for example, let me say, as I'm primarily a writer, so written word is where I'm most comfortable. So for me, when ChatGPT kind of became popular, it presented a very unique challenge because one thing is the way I work, my processes will have to adapt, will have to
Mm-hmm.
change. And also, I'll have to learn how to utilize this new tool, which can help enhance my work, or it also has its negatives. I'll have to consider that, I'll have to adapt to it. But the impacts of ChatGPT in general have been wide ranging, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like it can save you time. It's far more efficient in terms of like basic structures. You could get all that out of the way. You don't have to waste time on email templates and so on. So, how has the challenges that you've noticed? How have they impacted your work, and what has changed for the better or worse in the long term?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's such an interesting question, and I think it's going to be a little ways yet before we as an industry really land on a final verdict about the current impact of AI, this generation of AI.
mm,
But personally, I'm a big advocate for the use of AI. I think the interesting thing that is now happening is a digital revolution. I think it'll be hard to see the full impact again without the benefit of hindsight. In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we'll all be saying, "Yeah, we all saw it coming." But for right now, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we don't really know where this is going to shape us and how it's going to change everything. I
yeah.
think everyone
Mm,
is still actively trying to figure it out for themselves. But I think there are similarities to, in the mid to late 90s with the advent of the internet suddenly exploding and how that transformed business, how that transformed workflow, how it optimized a lot of roles that previously couldn't be optimized. I think there's a lot of comparisons with that can be made. But I think it's also hugely challenging for creative industries because all of a sudden, roles that were previously safeguarded as being sort of high priority roles that couldn't, the machines can't take over, suddenly the machines can. There's been a long trend even since the Industrial Revolution. You think about, the lamplighters in London going on strike. You're going back hundreds of years. Technological change will always have an impact on existing industries. That's never going to stop. It's always going to push further and further. And sometimes there's a tech winter, where new advancements slow down or completely hibernate for a little while, and then there's a breakthrough, and then there's a new watershed, and suddenly there's a lot of momentum, and that's what we're seeing now. So for the first time in a very long while, it's not just blue collar workers that are suddenly impacted by
mhm.
industrial change or technological change.
Mm,
Suddenly the robots are coming for the high paying, highly creative roles, and I think that's putting a lot of people under pressure in a way that they didn't expect.
Yeah.
And I think as a culture, creatively, not just in immediate media, but more generally. I think businesses that learn to adapt and use it, Kayla, as you said, as a tool, not as a way to replace an individual, but as a way to empower an individual to be more efficient, to create more content, to create better quality content, to adapt their workflow and embrace it now, you will see the benefit in 6 months' time or in 5 years' time, and so on. But anyone who doesn't take the time to learn it, anyone who's a bit has a resistance towards it, pushes back, doesn't think it's for them, I mean, I think you're going to be, as an individual, I think you'll be at a disadvantage in the job pool, because if you're a business and you have two applicants applying for the same job and there's one person who knows how to use AI effectively and someone who refuses to use AI, it gives one
Oh,
candidate a
yeah.
clear edge. And as a business, you want to
Mm,
have the most efficient staff possible and someone who's willing to adapt and willing to learn new skills. So I
mm,
think that's something that people need to consider who are coming into the market. This is a real leveler. It doesn't matter if you've been a creative professional for 25 years or 25 minutes at this point. All of these technologies are brand new. You can make a name for yourself if you learn how to use them now. Everyone's on a level peg. So I
Exactly.
think it's a really interesting time, and I think the businesses that learn to adapt to it and embrace it will see the benefit.
It's kind of reminiscent. Not sure. Have you watched the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory?
Yes.
You remember how Charlie's father was put out of work because he used to screw the caps on on the
Yes.
toothpaste tubes, and then later, towards the end of the movie, he gets a job kind of fixing up those machines, these new machines that came over and stole his job. And I feel
Yes.
like that's an aspect we tend to kind of like forget when we think about it. Like you're absolutely right that every time there's like a major technological like evolution happening, like a period of it, it cycles. We do see that some people's jobs are taken over by this new technology, but then a new kind of role opens up, or
Yeah.
several new roles open up, and that's always something that we can look forward to. And even with
Yeah.
like AI, when you're using it for writing purposes, you can use it for, you need to learn how to command it, and that's a skill that
Yeah.
you can actually improve on right now.
Yeah,
So
I think that's so exact, and I think if I had to give, I've often done workshops with my team around how we can use AI to create new content. I've done workshops with other members from different departments around the business, and I'm a big advocate for AI if it's done well. But that's the key part, is making people understand that AI doesn't wake up in the morning, put on a suit, drive to the office, sit down at a desk, and decide which projects it's going to do. AI is a tool. The fact that it's got the word intelligence in the name is sometimes, a little bit misleading. It's a tool. It doesn't have consciousness to choose its own projects, at least not yet. You
that is
you
not yet.
can be the
not yet.
person, not yet, but no, you can choose to point it in whichever direction you want. And I think someone, I can't take credit for this, but someone at one of the seminars I went to said AI is a tool the same way that production is a tool. You
Mm,
can choose which instruments to use at which points in a song.
Yeah.
And you might choose a different set of instruments, a different arrangement, to maybe, Paul McCartney. And his song, even though it might be the same core structure, will sound different to your song. And it all comes down to taste and skill and experience. And it's not just using it, it's how you use it. You can use it well, or you can use it with, real nuance. You can use it in a way that's a bit more brash or tasteless. It all comes down to taste and skill and execution. And it's no different to any other tool in that way. I mean, people would often, I remember my parents' generation, they would talk about having to have perfect handwriting. And in school you'd be reprimanded if you
ah,
didn't have perfect spelling and perfect handwriting. And then in our generation, that was sort of phased out. As I was going through school, at least, that was sort of phased out, and typing became a thing, and I never had to learn
yeah.
to write properly or spell properly. The machine just does it for me. And does that make me lazy? Yes, in a way. But it's also a skill that has now been replaced by a way to optimize that skill elsewhere. So it's not, some of it's optimization, some of it's laziness. And if you wanted to be a true purist and say, for a certain brand or a certain magazine or a certain piece of content, we're going to make sure that AI isn't used, I respect that. But if someone told me that a top 10 quiz, someone used AI to help create that content, you have to ask yourself, how much does that undermine the editorial quality of something that's not necessarily the most deep dive, highbrow editorial piece of content to begin with? If that can just
Mm,
optimize process, make people's lives easier, keep magazines in business, keep the industry moving forward, then I completely support that.
Absolutely.
I feel like I,
Mm.
I understand where you're coming from, Ben. Like, I think me joining into being in social media, also creating content for about 2 years now, and AI kind of come in, become way more mainstream just about, what would say, 8 months ago.
Mm.
And that changed the way I do content because I used to spend a lot of time writing captions, and just to make sure that it's aligned with, what I want to say. But now it's helping me to do this process much faster. But I'm not gonna lie, at the beginning when I see people doing social media content for 30 days, I panic a little bit. I was like, is it gonna take over what I'm gonna do? Because that's my job. I'm creating content, I'm seeing what's gonna happen next, I'm predicting the trends, I'm seeing what our customers want to hear.
Mhm.
At least, marketing is still has a lot of decision makings that has to happen that AI can't do for us.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was
I
just a
agree.
lot of, it's no boundaries. And now I feel like we're starting to see, as it become more mainstream, we're looking at how it can help us to work more effectively. And it's definitely true, like companies want to see you adapting to it and want to see you utilizing the tools to make, you work way more effectively. But that kind of leads me to the question I want to ask you, because when you mentioned you enter into this industry 12 years ago after you
Mhm.
graduated. So I'm sure, like when you first started working in tech a few years back, the way you reach out to recruiters, even the interview questions that they ask you, would be quite different from, how things are now. And I'm sure you are probably currently, might go for a few interviews and hire for companies for immediate media as well. What do you think the biggest differences are?
I mean, I'll be honest, I actually think they're surprisingly similar to what we found out when I first entered the job market 10 plus years ago. And I know that's maybe not the right, maybe that's not the answer you're expecting, but I genuinely think that as much as tech evolves, the one consistent is having a staff that can evolve with that technological change, but also just have the right
Mm,
attitude and be creative and be willing to be passionate about their work. That's the one consistent that I've seen for the last 10 years. I mean, I would much rather have someone with the right attitude and be enthusiastic and passionate about their role working on my team, but have no skill set in the actual tools they'll be using because we can train someone on that. You know, if you're
true,
determined and if you
true.
have a certain ability to learn things, you can be trained how to use a piece of software or how to set up a podcast in our example, or how to use a dashboard to read data.
Mm,
What
mm,
doesn't work very well is when you have someone who's trained to the utmost level on a particular piece of software, knows how to use it, so there's no development there to learn new skills. They say they're a master at that to begin with, but doesn't have the right attitude to lean in and put themselves into the role and be passionate and come up with creative solutions and be polite and courteous to the people they work with. Those are the things that I think have always been valued. And we're lucky enough at Immediate to work in a culture where people are very respectful to one another. We have a discipline here where it doesn't matter if you're the most senior person in the room or the most junior person in the room. If you spot something that you think can improve the project, you have a response. You're encouraged. You have a responsibility
mm.
to raise your hand and politely voice that opinion. So I think in that environment, the values always stay the same, but the tools move. So if for
True.
example, tomorrow there's a new audio editor or a new transcription tool or a new online recording platform like we are using currently to record this podcast, that's never going to change. I think if you're the type of
Mm,
person who thinks once I learn this one piece of software, once I learn this one skill set, I can just chill out for the rest of my career, then tech is maybe not the place for you because next week, next month, next year, that those goalposts are going to keep moving, and it's your
yeah.
responsibility to know how to use the new piece of tech.
Mm,
But broadly, if you master a generation of tech, the principles stay the same. The video editing tools that people are using now are the same as the video editing tools that people used back in the 90s or even the 70s. They've just been digitized and optimized. But the basic principles of how to list tracks, how to use transitions, etc., have all stayed the
mm.
same. So that's one reassuring thing that I think
That's
has
very
shone through from
reassuring.
my experience.
Very much.
Very reassuring. I think for people who are
Very.
listening, they, a lot of recent graduates, they are thinking about what is the tool that employers want us to use now? How can I get a certificate for that? How can I show that I can use the tool? How can I make sure that I'm up to, I don't know, industry standard? But what you
How many
just said, I
LinkedIn polls
hope
do I have to complete?
have the yeah. And what you just said, I hope it put a lot of people at ease, because you mentioned, having the right attitude.
Yeah,
Would you mind sharing, when you say the right attitude, would you mind sharing maybe a few qualities that you normally would look into in a candidate, especially if they are creative?
definitely. But I think, well, if you're in a creative role, it's probably different to a different type of skill set. You need to have a different
Yeah,
type of mentality. But one of the best qualities to have is to allow room for other people's opinions. Not to go
yeah,
into
very
any
true.
discussion with your mind
Yeah.
made up. Be willing to hear other people out, genuinely hear other people out, and
Mm,
make compromises and admit that you don't know everything. Be humble, be vulnerable. I think that is something that especially new people coming into the space see that as a way of maybe displaying weakness, and they have to be very headstrong and have to know exactly what everything does. But I don't care if you've been here for 5 minutes or 5 years or 50 years. There's always new stuff you can learn. There's always
mm,
someone else's perspective that can help improve your understanding of a situation. Even if you've mastered it, it's ever evolving. There's new things to learn every day. So I think just
mm,
having that level of understanding and realizing that putting your hand up and saying, I don't know everything about this is a strength, not a weakness. I think that's number one. But I also think just being a reasonable, polite person. I mean, as silly as that might sound,
mm.
um, I don't know if I'm giving away any tricks, but maybe I am. But one of the interview questions we always ask people uh, is sort of a trick question, I suppose. And we always say, if you're managing a podcast studio and at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, two brands, two clients show up at the exact same time, there's obviously been a clash.
Yes.
It's not your fault. It's nothing to do with you, but you're the person responsible for the space. There's two people staring at you, wondering what to do. What do you do? And the purpose of that question isn't there. I'm
Mm,
giving everything away now. I can never ask that again in any interview. Uh, but the purpose of that question isn't for them to say, well, person A goes first or person B goes first. It's to put someone on the
mm.
spot, see how they do under a certain amount of pressure, but also see
Yeah.
how polite they are and how reasonable they are at trying to communicate and
Mm,
compromise with two different stakeholders in a situation where there's no fix. There's no direct fix. It's a complex
mm,
problem. You
mm,
have to look
mm.
into it at different levels. And I don't really mind what the answer is. I'm just looking for the calm under pressure, and I'm looking for the quality of character that someone shows.
No,
Um,
that's a great question. We should probably start asking like an
well, that's it. I can never
Please cut
ask
this
it
impossible.
out.
again.
No, we
So
got to
yeah,
cut this out of the whole podcast because we are going to use it now
Oh, this is so good. Please, Kayla's, we
very
have to keep it.
selfishly.
But yeah, but we were like, our internal team, when we are hiring as well, I think our head of recruitment also gave away her trick is to just to ask tough questions. Like she would pick
hmm,
three questions that are just, it's impossible for you to get the perfect answer. There's no
hmm,
perfect solution to this situation, and she just want to see how they are solving how they approach the situation, how they would solve it. And like you said, the character of the person as well.
yeah,
I haven't thought that deep. Like I mean, like I have interviewed a few people, but this is such a great trick. Like I'm gonna start using. I just want to
hmm.
see if they're a decent human being. I think that's so important.
Yeah. And if someone is willing to go the extra mile and do the work, then you can rely on that person. And if they don't know a particular piece
Mm,
of software, well, it's not like I know every piece of software under the sun. I don't think anyone does. It's just about having
yeah.
the right attitude to learn as you go.
When we were saying about what we are looking for in a candidate, most of our listeners, they're Gen Zs, they're just entering into work market, wondering what they should do. So what do you think they should consider if they are job hunting? What should they look for in a company?
Hmm.
Because most of the time it's really desperate, don't you think? Like if they can give me a pay and then if I can work in this field, then I'll be okay. But there are areas that they don't really consider. What do
Yeah.
you think?
I think it's a very complex issue, which is probably more
Mm,
complex now than when I first entered the job market, and it was still pretty
mm.
complex then.
Yeah.
I think if you're starting out in the industry, I would not hold yourself to any sense of expectation for your first role. I would simply just try your best to get a role at a professional level in a creative space and take whatever learnings you can. Don't see that as the finish line, that is the starting line. If it's not ideal, don't just feel like it's not the right industry for you or not the right career type for you. Figure out why. Is it because the hours don't work? Is it because you're not passionate about the company, the product? Is it because the culture of that particular company isn't right for you? But effectively, if you haven't got a wealth of experience, the sad but very true reality is you don't have as much control of where you go next, because if you haven't got a lot of experience and a lot of weight to add to a company, then you're not in a position to dictate where you get to go. That's the
Yeah.
unfortunate truth of it. So I think abandoning a sense of expectation and sort of entitlement really is key, and just being humble and taking one experience after another as they come. Build up your experience, build up your, not just so it looks good on a CV, but so you actually have skills to lend to a company. I think people often see working at different publishing companies, different creative companies, um, as something that's a bit of a medal, bit of an achievement. It looks good on the CV. There's a lot of people who work at various different companies over the course of their first 10, 20 years in the industry, and that's fine. But I think if you look at it from the company's perspective, what they really want is someone who can add value to their team. They want someone
Yeah,
who knows how to
100%.
deal with
Yeah.
people. They want people who know how to do projects, keep clients happy, turn things around quickly and up to good quality. Think of it from their perspective. How can you make their life as easy as possible? How can you, in a hiring process, what can you do to make your candidacy the obvious choice? And I think that's often lost. You haven't got to ask permission to make a good impression. If you're the most valuable person in the running, you're going to get picked. It's as easy as that. And businesses want someone with a proven track record or a proven attitude or a proven skill set, where they understand the company's mission and are willing to work on behalf of the company to make things happen, keep them in business, generate new revenue, make clients happy, whatever it might be. So I think having that business mindset, whether you're in a creative role, a tech role, a management role or not, just understanding what is the company based around, and then trying to support that overall goal. That's key.
Absolutely. And I think, like, especially for us as creatives, I think staying flexible and adapting is very, very important. Ben, in your experience, could you share with us, a bit of your insights as to how you could continue to stay flexible and adapt to unprecedented changes in your career?
I really hope you use COVID as an example, Ben. We cannot
Do you know what? I didn't even
forget.
I didn't even think about COVID, which would have been probably a good place to go with
Oh
it.
my God,
What do you
there's
mean
a
you don't think
bigger
about
one.
COVID? We're still in
Isn't
like
it the
Well,
2020,
biggest?
part three.
well,
Isn't that the biggest
okay.
unprecedented?
I think maybe it is, but maybe my brain's just not firing fast enough this afternoon. No, I mean, COVID's an obvious one, definitely. But I think, okay, well, let's take COVID as an example. If you go back to March 2020, we had to think on the spot. We've got various titles that need to be produced. Everyone's working from home. We don't have access to our studio. We don't have access to any of our resources that we previously had. And we had to pivot on the spot. We had to come up with a set of roles and systems for making sure that contributors that were based on a global level have had access to microphones and equipment and recording software overnight. That had to be managed. And it's in times like that where some businesses adapted very quickly and made up a lot of market share and made a lot of gains. And we did, as awful as it sounds, in terms of the podcast, that saw a boom. Obviously, we're not happy about that from a global perspective, considering the state that the world was in. But the podcast did get extra listeners because people had extra time at home and people had extra time to listen, and viewing habits changed, listening habits changed. And we were there to support that need at that point. And we were
Yeah.
very happy about that. And we think that we did such a very good job at adapting to that crisis. But I think, if you look at publishing more broadly, um, publishing has technically been in crisis for the last 30 years. People have
Yeah.
been predicting the decline of print magazines, and in a lot of cases, a lot of very historic titles have unfortunately suffered at the hands of reduced circulation, and various titles have been discontinued and so on. So, COVID's a very specific example over a very set time period, but actually digital content effectively went through a boom during that period. But I think more broadly, working in media is about constantly adapting to new opportunities. It's about new partnerships. It's about how to produce online content in the wake of doing less and less print content. Potentially, for a lot of brands, that's very much the case. And it's about how to optimize an online marketplace that maybe hasn't been optimized to its fullest yet. Thinking about content subscriptions for us as a specific goal. That's something that we're still relatively new to in podcasting, but are very interested in developing. And yeah, virtual events, live events, all of these things are what publishers are doing now in a bigger and bigger way. Whereas before it was very much a smaller part of their business and print was very much the focus. So I think in our environment as a publisher and as a content creator, we're just very used to change on a very macro level.
Yeah.
Yes.
The amount of change that I've been through as a content creator the past 2 years is just
Yes.
it. Yeah, I can't put a finger on it. It was just like
Yeah.
so many, and at this point, if someone tell me there's a new feature, I'm like
Yeah.
a new platform,
Well, I
a
mean, you were
new
probably really busy, and then all of a sudden TikTok showed up, right? And then we go again.
And then we have a
there we
meeting
go,
saying, okay, so
and
how do
then
we
we
use
have
TikTok?
Yeah.
how do we do this? I'm not sure if you know, when we have this, I think Instagram started broadcast
Mm.
function where you can talk to your subscribers like one on one, but they can't talk to you. So it's a bit like a WhatsApp group, but you are the only one who can publish things.
Mm.
Yeah, it was like another meeting and going to, well, what are we doing with this? How do we engage? How do we make sure they see our content?
Yeah.
Threads as well. It was just always
Yeah.
new,
Threads.
always changing.
Yes. There's more
But
social
that's
We
never,
did
media.
that for three
unfortunately,
days.
that's
Yeah,
never going to stop. That's the simple reality of it. And again, the
yeah,
same skill sets of how you tell stories and optimize different platforms in ways that are native to each separate platform. A tweet is different to a YouTube short, is different to, well,
yeah,
that's quite similar to a TikTok, but it is different. And the storytelling aspect is the thread that holds those together. The skill set of how to engage with different audiences who want different things is the consistent thread. Maybe, Angel, I'm making assumptions about your job, but if you would agree, maybe that's the consistent thread for what you do. But the platform will always change, or the way to use the
yeah.
platform will always update.
Yeah,
If I'm not wrong.
I guess it would depend. It depends on when we talk about creatives. Obviously, today everyone who is here is like production in some sort of media. For Cadus, is writing. For Ben, use audio. For me, it's video. We are all producing something like that. My sister is a web designer for UI
Hmm.
UX. It's also creatives, and she also struggled a little bit because I think there is a new AI tool that can create landing pages in a second, something
Yep.
like that. And we actually asked her, we were like, what do you think about this, because you are going to graduate in 3 months time and it looks like you don't have a job anymore, and I'm being the tough sister as I've always been. And she had a really constructive discussion with us, saying what can be replaced and what can't be replaced and what is her role in this. And I was like, her university is doing such a great job
Hmm.
teaching them, understanding the market and understanding where they at. I feel like maybe even when they're interviewing with like graduates for this year,
Yep.
September, October, if they're interviewing, they might be having questions asked by employers saying, what do you think about AI taking over
Yep.
your job?
Yep.
Stuff like that.
I mean, considering a lot of universities are using AI to help write lesson plans, it would be a bit rich not to embrace
Yeah,
it uh,
yeah, yeah,
at a more granular level for the skill set itself.
AI
Uh,
lesson plans and AI assignments. It's going great
yeah,
over there.
yeah, you're right. And then AI markers who can mark the work. Yeah,
mm,
but no, I think that's exactly the sentiment, and I think it's interesting to think now if there's going to be a plateau or where there's going to be a plateau. Will the technology continue to evolve at the pace we've seen over the last sort of year or 18 months or so, now to the point where major businesses are taking it very seriously? Um, AI has made leaps and bounds in the past and then hit a wall and stopped at a certain level, and then it's gone through what the tech will call it winter. for anyone listening. Um, but then another innovation comes along and pushes it forward a little bit more, and then there's another winter. So I think we're either at a point now where we're going to see such a substantial leap forward where AI is integrated on a daily level to the point where
Yeah.
AI could be, a personal PA tool, or it could help you write, meeting plans, organize your diary, create content.
Yeah.
We're already seeing that, but we're certainly on a broad level overall still in a relative period of infancy in terms of how that's being used in most places. Some companies have been
Mm-hmm.
on this for a little while longer, and
Yeah.
it has
Yeah.
given them an edge.
Hmm.
But as the technology progresses, it becomes more and more valuable because it's evolving faster. It can do more. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a bit chicken and egg at the moment. The more people that use it, the more demand, the faster it progresses. So I think we're going to
Yeah.
see an acceleration of how these tools are going to evolve and how they're going to be used more and more.
Absolutely, and it just got me thinking. I was actually talking to a friend of mine very recently, and his concern was that he doesn't know how where he stands with all the AI produced content around, and he's a graphic designer. So he was just like, okay, if I were to utilize AI right now to aid me in my work, what's going to stop it from just completely eradicating my role anyway? What's going to stop it? Because you have to feed the machine for the machine to actually give you content. And as you continue to feed it, it becomes well learned on your specific skill set, your specific styles.
Hmm.
So in that kind of a situation, people are worried. People are worried. And like we can easily say, oh hey, it's okay if AI takes your jobs because the point is to make it easier for humans. AI is supposed to be a tool that's supposed to aid us, not take over our jobs. But it could happen. There's a potential. There's a potentially an opportunity for it to happen. So, what would you tell these people in order to sort of like to calm them because there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of screamy tweets online. So, are they called tweets? Are they called X's now? What are they called?
Um, I'm not on either, I'm afraid. So to the people
You're
who are
missing nothing.
afraid, yeah, I've actually gone the other way and I've completely got rid of all social media, and I feel a little bit more clear for it, by the way. So just for anyone out there feeling the strain.
No, I did the same. I did the same.
You're
Even
saying
And
that,
I,
but
aren't
you're
you
head of
aren't you
social
a
media.
social you're a social media manager?
I okay. The thing is, I think I really appreciate the opportunity to express a healthy, good, valuable content because
Hmm.
I've been through something really similar, like not too long ago, graduating, going through all of those processing, and then now working in this role, giving advice back to people who might need something like that. But my own page is not like that. So I'm like, okay, I'm
Hmm.
going to choose for me. I will not run my page. But for the company, I would like to give what I can.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like, I don't know.
No, it
I
makes
think it's
sense.
working some way.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's working in
Well,
some way.
curating your
I
own
think
content is
yeah,
Mm,
it's kind of like a bus driver's holiday as well, right? I mean, if you work in
mm,
social media all day and you get to see behind the curtain, you probably don't want to go home and in your downtime then scroll for
yeah,
hours on social media. You've kind of done it, right? I mean, I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm head of a department now, which is a really privileged position to be in. So I don't spend the majority of my day editing content the way that I used to when I was an editor. But
Mm.
certainly when I was an editor, making two or three, cutting through two or three shows a day to one extent or another, the last thing I was going to do was going to be to go home and then listen to two more
And edit another
podcasts.
show. Oh, yeah.
So I totally get it. For the people online who are scared, I guess my feedback would um, be afraid, be very afraid. Um,
Okay.
yeah, reassuring advice. No, I mean,
very good.
there's no scenario where a role somewhere is not going to be affected. I mean, if people online are looking for a sugar coated version of that, then they're
Mm,
probably in for a bit of a shock. In all
yeah.
honesty, there will be some roles that are going to be optimized by AI and made more redundant simply by virtue of the fact that it can be done easier and it can be optimized by a tool. That is the same. It's always been. And that is unfortunate in the short term. But for example, a junior staff writer who might be on one of our brands previously, historically, might have spent a lot of their time going through um, archive content, IP that we have, and thinking about ways to create quizzes or listicles or top 10 factoids, etc. That is typically not the job of a senior editorial staff member. That is not the job of a well-known contributor or big name talent who we'd commission in to write a key feature for us in this month's magazine. That is work that is done on a more junior level. What AI is capable of doing is replicating that junior level work. AI can't
True.
currently create, a keynote feature about new research and have a
Yeah.
new take on developing science or developing research. So that's as yet the next frontier that has yet to be majorly affected by people who want strong editorial content that's really
Yeah.
robust and really fact checked and really proven at the highest
Yes.
editorial level. But for those people who previously got a chance to get their foot in the door at a publishing company and make quizzes, make top 10 lists, and so on, it's not that that role's gone away. It's just that if you are the person appointed to do those pieces of content, you will now be asked to use AI to do those pieces of content.
Yes.
And whereas before, someone might be able to turn out one quiz an hour for the sake of argument, now you can turn around 10 quizzes an hour. So it's an
Yeah.
optimization factor for the business. It's not necessarily that that role changes, it's that the output changes because we're able
Yeah.
to do more. So I'd encourage people to keep an open mind. Obviously, things are going to shift. But yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It might just mean you spend less of your time doing the junior level tasks and more of your time focusing on big picture tasks, which is surely, when you take a step back and take the element of threat out of the equation, something that most people would welcome. I would imagine.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. Thank you so much for this advice. I did not anticipate you saying just to be very scared. But we are loving the conversation we have today. But unfortunately, it's all the time that we have for this episode. But before we end this entire recording, Ben, I feel like you obviously our target audiences who are listeners are
Mm-hmm.
recent graduates, university students. Is if there's one unconventional career advice that you can give them to end this episode today, that would be amazing.
The weirder, the better, by the way.
Weirder the better. Oh,
Yes.
I'm not sure.
There's one
No
advice that
pressure.
we
No
don't normally
pressure.
see, we don't normally hear. Um, what do you think that would be?
Oh, I've only
What would
really
you
got
say?
conventional advice, I suppose. Uh, Now you've put me on the spot. Well, I'm not sure if this is
Mm,
unconventional or not, but
mm.
look, this may not be the weirdest thing you've ever heard, but it's certainly one of the best things I could advise someone to do, which is
Let's do this.
maybe a
Yep.
bit of a platitude. Maybe you've heard it before, but I genuinely mean it. If you're going into a new job market, if you're trying to apply for a different company, don't be someone you're not. Don't try and be all business. Don't try
Wow.
and be all knowing. If uh, if you're if you're funny, be funny. If you're nice, be nice. If you're smart, be smart. They're going to figure it out eventually anyway. Use it as an asset. Don't pretend to be someone you aren't. It won't do you any favors in the long run. And
Mm,
effectively, in a long term career, maybe not your first role when you're starting out, which may only last a small while. Who knows? Typically, that is the case for a lot of people. But when you find a
mm.
company you're happy at, effectively, you're kind of finding your own tribe, and it's a lot easier to
Yeah.
fit into
Yes.
that when you're
Oh my
upfront
God.
about who
Yeah.
you are and you're vulnerable and you can just be honest from the start. So I'm not sure if that's the weirdest advice. It's probably not, but it's the advice I've got. So how about
It's probably the
That
best.
works.
Honestly,
It's good advice.
honestly, it's the best. I completely agree with finding your tribe because I think I
You
found
never know.
mine, and I'm super lucky that I've got a
that?
group
Aww.
of weirdos.
Aww.
My weirdos.
Is it because we're
Oh,
going to do
good.
Because
bubble tea next weekend?
uh
Uh,
yeah, no, super lucky, but definitely this is, please listen to Ben's advice because you have no idea if you get into a job for like more than a year, if you stay
yeah.
in a job for 3 years, 5 years,
Yeah.
you want to be happy,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
being yourself is just the most important thing. But thank you so much, Ben, for joining for this episode. We would love to have you back anytime soon. Please
Yeah.
say yes.
Yes. 100%. No
Thank
trouble
you.
at
Wow, this
all.
is coercion. He's still being
Um,
recorded.
I
You,
think, I think, I think our founders will be really happy that this that Ben said yes. But
No
if you
trouble at
like this
all.
episode, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and please let us know what you like to hear about next because we make content based on what you like to know.
yes,
Yes.
that's right. We'll see you next episode. Bye. And it's been your host,
Uh,
Kalis, and nobody else on this call, just me.
all right.
Just me. It's just me.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.